Hey folks, I'm Shiloh.
I'm Anastasia.
Today on the Demystify Side podcast, we are speaking with each other. So this is something honestly we wish we did more often because we go through all of these conversations with these incredibly well thought out theories and ideas, and we have little chance to unpack them other than that little introduction that we do. And several of the conversations we've had recently, which I'm not sure I suppose we'll have put them out at this point. They really test the limits of your credulity, particularly with respect to being in the face of theories that are widely accepted and, let's say, generally thought to be wildly productive and useful technologically. And so we wanted to think about what it means to have an open mind and the limits to which that's valuable and what it means. It's not quite as simple, we've determined over the course of this show, as just having an open mind, right? And of course, there's tons of horrible ideas, not horrible, but just broken ideas that don't hold together long enough to even learn something from. And so we wanted to explore what our process is by which we study new ideas that we encounter. And I think a lot of people don't realize it, but a lot of the different theories that we encounter don't make it to the podcast you guys listen to. We meet with people nonstop. And a lot of those ideas don't have that needle in the hay that we're hoping for on this show. So today we're going to just sit down and have a conversation about that method, and we're going to peg it to a somewhat old textbook at this point.
I don't think you can call it a textbook.
I almost wanted to say text, and then I said book, so I just said
A
textbook.
textbook. So I mentioned this on the show a bunch of times. It is Feyerabend Against Method. And Feyerabend identifies as a scientific anarchist. And that sounds crazy because anytime that you hear the word anarchy, you immediately think of, I don't know, safety pin punks at some underground rock show, spray painting things on the walls.
Dirty communal living.
Yeah, exactly. But Feyerabend's point is that science is a really weird endeavor of humans. And we really make a serious mistake when we begin to think that our scientific theories are fixed, where there's an old idea that's been around for a long time, and it is the idea that will persist for forever.
Especially really successful theories that make a lot of useful predictions. They have the tendency to calcify the hardest.
And his argument is that science is a way of approaching ideas. It's something that requires this plurality of possibility and the consistent maintenance of an exploratory tendency. And so as soon as we lose that, as soon as we start to present science as being, like Shiloh says, a series of needles that have been found that you now need to take and put into your pincushion and just carry them around for the rest of your life, the idea is that no. Your job is to find the needles. And there's a way of doing that. And that's ultimately what the show is about. And so when we present theories that make people think that it's totally nuts, like Simon Schack's Tychosium or Forrest Moretti's environmental toxin theory of disease, it's really easy for people to just say, no, the needle is the Copernican heliocentric system. No, the needle is that the CDC knows what's right.
The germ theory of disease, let's say.
The germ theory of disease. And we're like, those were useful. They got us this far. But we can never rely on them so fully that we completely stop interrogating if there's a different possibility for interpreting the world.
Because that requires muscles that you're not born with. To be able to pull that off, to find needles in the hay, is not easy at all. And I honestly feel like the more of these podcasts we do, the better I get at it. And the better anyone's going to get at it, right? It's something you have to exercise. I think that's at the real heart of the value of this method, right? Your pincushion full of needles is great. But if that's all you inherit, if you never learn to develop that muscle for finding needles, then you can't productively contribute to the future.
To really anything, because you're just going to be somebody who's walking around and is like, well, no, this is how it is. This is the truth. And it's like, no, these things change. And it's terrifying when they do. you have all of these beliefs that are central to your worldview, and if any of those fall apart, then all of a sudden it's easy to panic. And I guess what I really want this space to be is a place where we can all figure out how to not panic when that happens. Because it has to happen. Evolution must occur.
And I also want to refine our method for doing this. And so in some sense, the conversation that we recorded that follows explores the different ways that we can do a better job of that, because that's what we're really after.
And it starts from the lens of trying to understand why certain platforms for the distribution of ideas are so popular, and what it means to actually be able to have a way of talking about ideas that isn't just you sitting in your living room completely isolated from the rest of the world, because the goal is to be able to help. the goal is to make this widespread ultimately. And I hate admitting that even, right? Ideally, I would be able to say that I would be forever happy if our audience never grew larger than what it is right now, because our audience is fantastic. The people that watch are amazing. It's a great place to be and to be a part of. And yet at the same time, I'm like, God, I want it to be bigger. And that's a really interesting thing, because how does that happen?
Well, I think you have to ask yourself why you want it to be bigger. I mean, there's obvious answers, right? It's easy. We get higher quality guests, the higher subscriber count that you have, and so forth. People want distribution of their ideas. And so if you want to talk to people who are really making waves in the world, oftentimes, yeah, there's people in the underground that you can find that are incredible, but a lot of the really well thought out, really erudite thinkers who can talk really well, they want that subscriber base. I mean, that's the primary motivation for me, as far as I can tell. I want to have higher and higher quality conversations, and a lot of times those people demand a larger audience in order to give their time to it. But overall, I think that we are searching for ways to build something akin to an institution that doesn't get corrupted by monolithic factors. And I think that's why we start off examining the Lex Fridman podcast, which is obviously this enormous science podcast. And there's not really any runners up. And that's just an interesting phenomenon. And it's like, well, why is that? So we kind of start there. And I think by the end of the conversation, we kind of conclude how it could have gone a little differently despite factors that are out of Lex's control.
So I realized something as we were just talking, when you said that the goal is to build an uncorruptible institution. And we talked about this in our conversation relative to the internet and the way that you have these tech companies, and the tech companies become corrupted, but a protocol like RSS, I'm probably not using that word correctly, I don't think RSS is a protocol, but a technology like RSS is incorruptible because it's an approach. And that might be the key to this, which is that we're not necessarily trying to build an institution. What we're trying to do is we're trying to build an approach that cannot be corrupted. And I think, I think that's...
Well, I mean, part of your approach is building a podcast audience, right?
I mean, sort of. Part of the approach is also planning conferences and getting people together and hanging out with people and making friends and applying whatever it is that we do for other things, right? It's not... I think the podcast is the most visible aspect of these things, but it certainly isn't the overarching goal that I have for myself to be a podcaster. It's like the podcast is a part of a larger endeavor, which is to build this community of people that believe in the approach.
So we explore all of this in the conversation, and I think we should just let it rip.
Get to it.
Let people make up their own minds, and hopefully you guys get something out of this. It was fun for us.
Yeah. If you enjoy it, come over to patreon.com. We get together with patrons every Sunday. You can tell us what you think, tell us who we should talk to, tell us what we should do. Keep us honest. Make sure that we're putting all of our effort to these investigations as opposed to selling junk. And yeah, I'd love to see you there. Every Sunday we hang out with our patrons. It's the best time of week for us. 100%. So come on over, patreon.com/demystifysci. Otherwise, enjoy the conversation. We'll see you next time. See ya.
The scientific revolution starts now.
The Demystify Sci podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
new favorite conspiracies is that Lex Friedman is secretly sponsored by Coca-Cola. Or was at some point in the past.
I think that goes without saying. I mean,
It's just the default assumption.
They don't have to announce these product placements, right?
I think they do. Technically,
Movies don't, right?
No, but YouTube has a thing where you're supposed to write if you have a product in your video.
Yeah, but they don't check. It's not.
Yeah,
It's not a
how could
mandatory
you even
box you
make
have to
that
check.
case?
Yeah.
How could you make that case even, right? If somebody's hawking something and is like, you should drink Coca-Cola, then you'd be able to tell.
Or if you have your own ad, right? If you put an ad basically in the middle of a show.
But if you're just drinking a product that you happen to turn the label towards the camera, who can say?
He could also. It could just be part of his useful idiot shtick too, right? If he just happens to like Coke Zero, Coke might just start giving his podcast some help, you know?
I like to think of him as being very calculated. Where, the path to his position in the world, I like to imagine it as being the result of directed conscious action at each step where there's a clear line between risk and reward and action and consequence, because otherwise it's too hard to even fathom.
Really, I find it easier to fathom the other way around, where people, like the big machines just use people, and the people, it's better the less they know about how much they're being used.
Well, that has to do with like high trust and low trust, but I think that number one, that is a perfectly reasonable way of seeing the world. Number two, the reason that I want to see the world differently is not because I don't think that it's more realistic necessarily, but it's more that I want to believe that there's a set of actions that I could take to achieve equivalent success. As opposed to looking at it and being like, the only way to do it is to be a useful idiot in somebody's game.
Well, you might be unwittingly. That's the whole thing. It's like you can be doing your thing and loving what you're doing and love Coke Zero or love being Lex Friedman or love being Anastasia, and you might be useful to somebody who will support you because you're useful to them.
But I'd like to believe that you could get to the position where you are supported that way through the consequence of your actions, not through the consequence of accident. Because if it's
it is through the consequence of your actions.
Okay.
Right, because Alexis really likes Coke Zero, let's say. And so as a consequence of his action of really liking Coke Zero, there's an incidental feature that Coke thinks that's really useful.
But you have to be big enough at some point for that to even happen in the first place. Do you know what I mean? Like, so he must have had the habit of drinking Coke from the beginning.
Sure.
And then got to a point where he was big enough where the company was like, I've noticed that you do this.
Yeah, but they're not going to call him up and be like, we noticed that you do this. They're just going to funnel money and resources to him and traffic and other things like that.
But Coke has no influence on traffic at YouTube.
That you know about.
I don't see the mechanism for it.
A $1 billion company calls up other $1 billion company and makes handshake deal. Like, really?
You'd have to look to see if there's more Coke advertisements on his channel in order to actually
they're not
get
advertisements.
To the bottom of it.
It's a product placement.
I mean, maybe. Maybe.
It just seems a lot easier. Like the few people I've known who have known people in intelligence, they just talk about how it's all about pulling levers for them. It's not actually about action, direct actions. It's almost never about direct action. It's like, we can move some money over here. We can move some money over there. We got a guy sitting in this position over here. He can pull this lever for us. Like, I think that there's vast networks happening below the surface in all of these companies, in so much as they can synergize. What's good for you is good for me.
I mean,
and the legislation can't even keep up. It's not like they can't even think of the laws to make until somebody does something and gets exposed for it.
Or somebody blows the whistle, yeah. Because I was thinking about the way that Google ad sales work. I've known people that have worked in ads there. And they basically have clients, right? A sales rep or a sales manager at a place like Google has a client, and that client is giving Google money in return for getting traffic, and that person manages that relationship. And so if you're advertising on Google or YouTube, these are not accidental advertisements, right? Like Coca-Cola is buying time on YouTube.
That's the traditional method.
I would bet that it still is, but
Sure.
it folds in what you're saying, which is that there's this next level of hidden product influence, which is that maybe they... I'm just trying to like come up with a direct line between the sales relationship with Coke and YouTube and then Lex Friedman's podcast getting big. Like, that's a harder thing for me to imagine.
Yeah, because it's not going to be obvious, right? The money will get funneled in different ways. It's going to be done very carefully, right? It's not going to be...
What's the
it's a
mechanism by
handshake
which
deal.
it works? What's like, why do they make Lex Friedman popular and not somebody else? There's plenty of people on camera drinking Coke Zero.
Well, I'm sure Lex Friedman's popular for other reasons, some of which may be above ground and some of which may be below ground, right? I mean, you have to go back to, like, when did Lex Friedman get famous? It was after he came out with Joe Rogan, right?
I have no idea.
So, I mean, that's the first time I ever heard about him.
But that's because I think that he was big before then, too. Like, he might not have been as big. But, like, what's the...
Well, you have to go back and be like, well...
It's not like he launched his podcast
how did
on Rogan.
How did that happen? How did he become friends with Joe in the
He's
first
into
place?
jujitsu, and
Millions of people are into jujitsu.
he knows Elon Musk, and he's like
How does he
traveling
know
in these
Elon
circles
Musk?
because he's an AI journalist first and foremost.
Okay, there you go. So he was really good as an AI journalist.
That's the point that I'm trying to make, is that like he did a thing that was useful and interesting to people, and on the back of that collected relationships, and those relationships then allowed him to propel himself into progressively higher and higher echelons, and I'm sure that he was useful to people all along the way.
It says on Wikipedia he rose to prominence in 2019 after Elon Musk praised his study, which concluded drivers remained focused while using Tesla's semi-autonomous driving system.
There you go.
So he did a study that was useful to Elon Musk. Elon Musk promoted him on the back of it. Again, Friedman was studying what he wanted to study. It was useful to somebody who had a tremendous microphone. And next thing you know, Joe's getting him to start a podcast, and he's
Oh, I
big.
think that he had a podcast before that. I don't think that he came on the Rogan show to start the podcast. But I could be totally wrong about that.
You're right. Wait. Hold on one second. Let me get to the bottom of that.
Because I remember we listened to a really early episode, and it was like the AI podcast or something like that. It wasn't even called the Lex Friedman podcast yet.
That's right. But hold on. I'm trying to figure out when his first appearance on Rogan was. So he started that podcast in 2018. Lex Friedman episodes, Joe Rogan podcast. The first one is number 1188. So that was 2018. So right the same time, as far as I can tell, that he started his podcast. He was on Joe Rogan for the first time. Now, how many podcasters do you know who's the same year they start their podcast, they're on Joe Rogan?
How many people... Okay, so the real base rate here
And then
is not... Hold on. The real base rate here should be how many people who are useful to Elon Musk start a podcast on the subject of things that are interesting to Elon Musk and then appear on the Joe Rogan show, because I bet that would be a fairly high number.
And he didn't get shouted out by Elon until 2019. So that was after all this happened.
Oh, my timelines are off. So what do you think is the order of events here?
I mean, I'm not saying there's anything nefarious here. I'm just saying that Lex was useful to Elon. He was interesting to Joe for God knows what reasons. Perhaps because he was already a prominent AI journalist. I don't know, though. I can't find any record of that before 2018 when he appears on Joe Rogan. So what was he doing that brought him to Joe's attention? Because there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of AI people who are also jiu-jitsu people. So how did that happen? I have no idea. But let's just say it was because Lex was the best AI, best jiu-jitsu guy in the country. And somebody was like, hey, Joe, I know you're interested in this AI stuff. There's this cool guy I met, and he's really into jujitsu. You guys should talk sometime. It's not impossible.
But it does sound really improbable.
it seems really, yeah. But everything in this business is kind of improbable. Like people, I mean, it's always been the case for showbiz. People in the right place, at the right time. I mean, there's hundreds of bands underground that no one will ever know about who are sick, like just absolutely nasty bands. But you know, they burn out really quick, or they're flash in the pan. They're gone. You know, bands don't last very long
It was interesting when I was
without big
looking.
mainstream support.
Yeah, I mean, you can only do something for so long.
I mean, you get tired, you're broke, your your wife leaves you. It's like,
Or you never get married, right? It's just, or you're always alone.
so I don't think we'll ever be able to. I mean, there might be more information about how they became known, but my point is, there's two totally entangled possibilities here in terms of how people rise to the top, and certainly, like you said, at some threshold level, you become a valuable mouthpiece for anybody who identifies with what you're saying. And if it's a big corporation that can identify with what you're saying, then they're going to support you. And if they can't do it above ground because you have principles and shit, well, they'll still do it below ground. At least I'm saying that there's nothing stopping them from what I can see. And they're smart. They have to figure out how to make money every single quarter, more than last quarter. So they're chock full of the most brilliant money making minds on the planet. These huge corporations, especially at the top when you're talking 7-figure salaries and shit. It's like,
So bring this back to Friedman.
oh, back to Friedman. I mean, we don't know where he came from, whether he's supported by Coke or not. He might not even know where he came from or whether he's supported by Coke or not. He seems to me like, when I listen to him, that he's got this, I don't know why this is happening to me kind of attitude. I don't know why I have this huge audience. I have no idea, right? And I kind of am tempted to believe him. It's very convincing to me. I'm like, yeah, maybe you don't. And maybe it's all just this random lightning strike of God, right? He's definitely a cool guy. He seems to enjoy what he does. He has genuine curiosity for the topics. I mean, that's a cool podcast as far as I can tell. But why is it that big of a podcast? Maybe it's because people want to have something to share in common, right?
So he used to work at Google before he went to MIT. And he was working on algorithms for artificial intelligence while he was at Google. And YouTube is a Google company. And so it stands to reason that he might have friends on the inside that are able to nudge whatever numbers on YouTube push him to be at the top. That seems perfect. Like we know that they can tweak the algorithm.
They do tweak the algorithm, right?
So it's entirely possible. Like I've seen this happen before in the AI space. Like there's another guy who, Dwarkesh, who runs the podcast. We listened to the one with the historian. And he was at some point anointed by Jeff Bezos. And then his podcast blew up.
Like Jeff tweeted about him, or
Jeff followed him on Twitter. And was apparently listening to the podcast. And so that's another case where you have this AI space where there's so much money that's happening right now that I feel like these billionaire kings are able to just kind of bestow patronage upon some intellectual circle that they like.
100%. It's all an attention economy. If
Well,
Elon Musk says, hey, check this guy out, it's like,
it is.
He's got so much influence in the social landscape.
And that's kind of the thing that's really interesting, is that these guys are now funding media sources without that being an official relationship. This kind of comes back to what we're talking about, right? Because it's not like, I don't think that Musk is giving money to Friedman. I don't think that Bezos is giving money to Dwarkesh. Maybe they are directly, who knows? But I doubt that. I think it's more just this microphone of, this is what you should all pay attention to, and then the hordes of the people that like that person go and pay attention to it.
100%. But
I
it's
wish
not
I was
something you'll
more
ever.
interested in AI. What are you gonna say?
It's not necessarily that it will ever be clear and transparent, these things, because they necessarily happen behind the curtain.
Ideally, if you had a system that was sufficiently simulated with enough parameters, you might be able to see what's happening behind the scenes. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that
I just think
that's not quite right. Hold on. I think that if you were to play game theory out to its ultimate conclusion, like, why were they so interested in game theory?
because they wanted to be able to risk cost benefit assess conflicts, essentially.
I think that it was the inheritance of the mind control studies that the CIA was doing in the 60s and 70s, where they were hoping that they could find some algorithm that could predict the future.
Right.
Where, like you said before, these guys aren't doing direct action, they're pulling levers. And I think that they tried to do direct action, where they were like, okay, we're going to dose everybody with LSD in the hope of using it as a mind control substance. And they're like, mind control doesn't really work. But incentive control
Or if we
does
paid
work.
Lex Friedman directly, he would never go for it.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So things just don't, that doesn't work.
Right. And so they're like, okay, so game theory is a way that we can parameterize a system enough to be able to predict the action that a rational actor will take. And once you look at rationality, you realize that you often can't boil it down to like 3 or 4 parameters, the way that games are usually set up. And so you build progressively larger and larger games that contain more and more parameters so that you can like quantifiably rationalize behavior that from the outside seems irrational. And that's what lets you predict the future, and that's what lets you mold it, because you're like, okay, so if I press here, my algorithm's good enough that it tells me what happens on the other side. And now I can kind of control everything. And these AI guys who are at the top, the tech billionaires of the world, that's kind of what they're doing. They have these systems of what every single person inside their system does is reacts to. And they can put a little bit of pressure subtly on one side, like with this relationship that we were talking about. And then I think they probably have a decent ability to predict what's going to happen on the other side.
Yeah, there's multiple layers of games going on, and it's hard to say how predictive any particular strategy is, especially if you're not privy to its underpinnings. I also don't know if it's a bad thing necessarily. I mean,
We've come across that
yeah,
before.
I mean, we live in a, but what I wanted to say, we can get back to whether it's a bad thing or a good thing, but it's almost like there's 2 layers. All right, so when you talk about a conspiracy theory, right, generally refers to some shadowy plan that's going on that's not above ground. But you can have it occurs to me that what we're skating around here is there's 2 levels, there's 2 degrees almost. There's outright conspiracies where all of the actors are in on the game. And then there's these 2nd degree conspiracies where the actors have no idea they're part of the game. They think they're killing it. And maybe they are. They're just doing what they do, but it's useful. And so they get played against one another. So
But that implies the ultimate conspiracy where there is a player. If they're being played against each other, there's got to be a puppet master.
In the case of our Friedman test case, it was Coca-Cola, so multinational corporation.
And that's kind of where I was like, I don't...
and Google, also multinational
That's the thing. I think that Coca-Cola jumps on this later.
Yeah.
And maybe... I don't know exactly how...
I mean, let me put something down. It's more advantageous for Coca-Cola or any multinational corporation that wants to have a person with a lot of attention rep their brand, that there be as few of those people as possible. Like, you wouldn't want a proliferation of people because they wouldn't be able to put it in front of an audience, right? It'd be very difficult and expensive to chase around a lot of different people. It's better to have one person rise to the top of the heap in that case.
Kind of. But if the argument is that what they're doing is they're using this passive promotion of somebody like Friedman who drinks Coca-Cola, not by directly appealing to Friedman, but by going through the back channel of YouTube. It seems like you would pay the same price for YouTube's algorithms to scan all videos that have a Coca-Cola can in them and just promote those videos over the ones that have Pepsi cans in them.
They might.
And so what I'm saying is that the proliferation of entities here, of the channels that have that are
That
promoting
seems like a bigger
Coca-Cola,
job, though, too. It would involve more people, which would involve less.
it's just an algorithm. Like, they know what's in the videos. They're scanning all of them. They're collecting data from all of them. They're training their AI models on it. They know they can catalog everything that's in all those
They
videos.
also know if they were honest about that and transparent about that, that the public would be unhappy with them.
About product placements?
No, about tweaking algorithms. They don't admit to it openly.
They do, especially after...
Not about, blacklisting words and people and stuff like that. Shadow banning.
No. They admit
There's
to...
plenty of... shadow banning is the most obvious thing that happens all the time, and they don't admit to it. So, we know they do some stuff, and people are pissed about it. But they're not trying to be open about... They're trying to avoid the direct stuff, right? They're trying to avoid the direct route.
Which is a little freaky, because I trust somebody who admitted openly to shadow banning much more than I trust somebody who does it and won't admit it.
Right.
Where my feelings on censorship are complicated.
Yeah, we've been through this.
Yeah, right? And so I'm like, I think that if you have
Mine are simple.
If you have a healthy ecosystem, then, and ease of transport between these different locations, right? Because right now, the reason that censorship really sucks is because YouTube's the platform. Like, if there were 30 YouTubes and it was really easy to just gather all of them together in one video RSS feeder, it wouldn't matter if stuff was censored on YouTube, because you'd also be subscribed to some network that didn't censor stuff.
Which would not be advantageous to you as a multinational corporation who wants your product to be supported. Whether it's a medical product during a time of desperation, or whether it is Coca-Cola. You want to have that centralized to one platform so that you can not contaminate your subliminal trick that this is the cool stuff. You want that to be prevalent to as many people as possible. So I think that it's unlikely we'll see a proliferation of different platforms. It's not a useful paradigm to the powerful players of the world.
There's a really long history of subversion of these sorts of attempts at control on the internet. The internet's built on the back of open source technology, and that's a huge part of the ethos of the people who built the place, where it's the commons, it's meant for everybody. And what we've seen is these corporations move in and control things, and the US government is involved with ISPs. I don't think we're at the point right now, and I could be wrong, but I feel like we haven't gotten to the level of censorship at the level of the ISP yet. Which is really, I don't know if you remember this, but we did a video a while ago.
Well, break that down for me a little bit more.
Well, so the internet service provider is like the ISP. And so you buy your internet from Spectrum, or you buy it from Comcast, or you buy it from Starlink, or whatever. There's like somebody who provides you the service where you have something that's wired into
I got
your
that, but
house.
how does that lead to, what layer of censorship would happen at the ISP?
The government goes to the ISP and is
Around
like,
Google.
Or Google goes to the ISP, and I don't know what... So the government has the ability to regulate the ISP.
The ISP wouldn't really determine what YouTube served up to me, though.
It could.
Really?
Yes. No, it could. Not that. It could block the competitor to YouTube from showing up.
Really?
It could, because like it routes all of the traffic, and that traffic, if unencrypted, is legible, and so it could just block a domain.
Wow. I didn't
But
know
the government
that.
doesn't do that.
No, but I didn't know the ISPs were capable of blocking domains.
I don't see why not. Like, theoretically.
I thought they were just essentially a conduit, a big,
Yeah, this is like a whole thing.
canal that just shuttled whatever came to them.
No.
Really?
They're not technically allowed
Gotcha.
to censor, but in other countries, like if you ever hear about like a censored internet, like in China or something, they're using the same framework for how the internet works with ISPs and customers and like
Yeah.
the distribution, but
I-
they're able to block entire domains. Like you can't access Google if you go through one of their
I
ISPs.
see. I see. I didn't realize it was at the level of the ISP. I just figured like their central hookup to the universe. We had some guys at the government.
Well, it's the ISP, right?
like
So it's like you have a
clean
company.
internet comes into ISP. ISP is the first line of filters.
I mean, the internet is it's an interconnected system, and so it's
Of
not like there's a
ISPs.
clean line of internet. It's
And
the internet
servers.
emerges out of what the traffic that the ISPs communicate between them, and then the connections from the ISP goes to you, and that's your conduit to the rest of the internet.
I got you.
And so if they're filtering that traffic, like a Brita filter will filter out some fraction of contaminants.
Okay, so tie this back to the corporate conspiracies.
Like, we haven't gotten to the point where the government is coming into ISPs that I know of, and is
Or
telling
corporations.
or corporations, and telling the ISPs you can and cannot cover this traffic. You have to block this website. It happens in other countries. I don't think it's happening in the United States yet. And, right, maybe. But the internet is built on this ethos of openness and exchange, and has a really long tradition of people building freeware or open source competitors for the privatized, expensive things. And so even if YouTube is huge and corporations support it, that doesn't mean that you can't get a new wave of independent, small networks that exist in parallel to the YouTubes of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I don't think that it's necessarily that we're doomed for this forever monoculture monopoly of YouTube. Because I think that it started when you were like, I don't know if there's anybody who can compete with them.
I mean, short of somebody like Elon Musk buying up YouTube, I don't know that if the corporate culture remains the dominant theme, that there will ever be less than a few options. If only one. One would be most profitable and efficient for them to get their products placed, whether it's a medical intervention or a Coca-Cola.
Kind of, but I'm also like, the point that I'm trying to make is that might be true, but they might only be able to maintain control for a brief period of time. Like, you can imagine somebody building an open source platform that is able to cross-index multiple different locations, multiple different websites, multiple different sources in such a way that it becomes a shell that sits on top of the infrastructure that's already been developed, which gives room for small competitors small companies to compete against YouTube, because there's another extra layer of shell where people will pull from the smaller channels, and so in their own feeds give those smaller platforms much more visibility.
Yeah, it's just adoption, right? I mean, if people want to use
built
that,
this technology.
right? And if the people who built that technology, you're assuming they won't just sell it back to the corporations at the end of the day.
Most open source projects remain open source. Like, this is a huge
Somebody's got to maintain
ethos.
it, though, right?
And this is the joke that, all of the internet's infrastructure depends on some obscure component built by Billy X in 1993.
Right. It's like Reddit getting sold to Condé Nast or whatever. It's like these things, they start off as a good idea, and then they get the right dollar number in front of them, and it's over.
Well, Reddit was never intended to be a charity or nonprofit organization or any kind of open source.
It might be a bad
project.
example. My point is that a lot of these things start with really good values.
Well, I think like RSS is a really good way of looking at this. You can't commoditize RSS. You can't, like, there's not a way that you can sell RSS to a company. It's just a protocol that's open on the internet. And so if you build a protocol that works like RSS, but is able to bridge all of these different websites and platforms, then it's not a thing that can be bought and sold.
No, this is exactly what I was pushing. I think the last time we had a solo conversation with the social media reader and the
Yeah,
the
and
blind reader essentially that feeds you what you
I like the
subscribe to,
blind reader. I don't know what challenges are involved in building something like this. It
or
seems
how long
difficult.
it could go without being captured. That's the real question.
RSS has never been captured. You can't capture it. It's a protocol. It's just that like people go and they're like, I like this blog, and you take it the RSS feed and you're like making your own platform.
But RSS readers could sell out.
Yeah, but that's like you just get
get a new
another
one.
one, right?
I don't know. I like it. It would be fun to talk to somebody in software development about this idea.
And I don't really know what makes it difficult, but I think that for the big platforms, they charge money to use their data. So if you want to be able to build something that pulls from Facebook, you have to pay Facebook for that privilege.
Right. So it would have to be a government thing, and the government would never go along with it because it's anti-corporate.
Wait, why would it have to be government?
Because it'd have to be imposed upon them. They'd have to demand that they make that public backend available.
That seems like an achievable goal. I think that actually could be done.
I hope so.
I think that people, as lawmakers, transition from being 90 years old and not understanding anything about technology, and they become younger and they come to realize how important the internet is and maintaining an open internet. I actually think that law is one of the only levers that we have for controlling what happens to the data.
Yeah, law works out sometimes and sometimes it doesn't, and insane rulings get made and great rulings get overturned. It's kind of insane. I mean, to tie this back to some of the conversations we've been having recently, the same thing seems to be playing out in other institutions like academia, where you have publicly funded research that's locked away behind these paywalls that goes all the way back to somebody also having a very, corporate-minded scheme of let's make a bunch of money. How do we do that? Right? Same process is going on. And it's really, really useful that it's centralized for that money-making operation.
But you can also point to the fact that 70 years after its inception, the government is now regulating that all publicly funded data needs to be available in the form of papers.
Yeah.
So
and the papers need to be free?
Yeah.
When did that happen?
It was a couple years ago that it went into effect.
So,
and they had until 2025 to transition. 1 second.
So if you publish a paper in Cell, you have to also publish it to a free archive?
No, Cell can't charge.
What?
Yeah, August 2022.
We gotta get to the bottom of it. What do you mean they can't charge?
White House requires immediate public access to all U.S.-funded research papers by 2025. The policy is a blow to journal paywalls, but its impact on publishing is unclear. President Joe Biden's administration announced yesterday that by the end of 2025, federal agencies must make papers that describe taxpayer-funded work freely available to the public as soon as the final peer-reviewed manuscript is published. Data underlying those publications must also be made freely without delay.
Nice. Good job, Biden.
And so, the point that I'm trying to say is that there's absolutely weird shit that happens.
Like, I do think there's other levers that can, there's other levers going on there. Like,
maybe. What do you mean?
Like what studies get funded in the first place and so forth.
That's true, but that's like level 3 of the conspiracy here. Like level 2 is the fact that the magazines and the scientific publications are taking government money, using it to fund research. People are taking government money, using it to fund research, and then selling it to these journals who make private money off of what is ultimately a public good.
Mm.
And so it's like, okay, that's apparent, that's obvious. And the lever of the government being like, hey, we have to close that loophole is a good one.
It's progressive.
Despite the fact that you're right that there's still the funding agencies, and the funding agencies will only select and choose certain projects to fund in the first place.
Yeah, and there's revolving doors between funding agencies and the industry.
Yeah, of course.
That's a sort of different corruption, equally onerous, but maybe a different matter.
In what sense?
Well, what I really wanted to talk about was the institutions and the idea of monoliths versus chaos, which gets us to Feyerabend. Because that was something that we had to check out again. We had to go back to the book because I feel like a lot of our conversations lately have circled around the audacity of various ideas and how there's one reaction which is very common to revolutionary ideas, which is something's wrong here, therefore the whole thing is wrong, therefore I can rest in peace. Right? When you put, we've had a few conversations. I mean, we haven't published all of them yet, but we had a conversation with Simon Shack that we just released yesterday, and we have one coming out with Forrest Moretti. And these are two people who have these absolutely heretical perspectives on some mainstream topics that are thought to be settled science. So in the case of Simon, obviously, he has this theory that the solar system is not arranged the way we think it is. With Forrest, he has a sense that all of these industrial toxins have caused a number of diseases which we attribute to infectious agents alone. And there's a portion of people when they hear those ideas that are going to become almost hurt emotionally by them. And they're going to find something about them that doesn't work because, look, let's be honest, all theories have problems. And they're going to be like, well, because this little thing doesn't work for me, the whole thing is garbage and I can go back to sleep.
Okay, so let me see if I can condense that.
And wait, to tie that to Feyerabend, Feyerabend would say something more like Adam Mastroianni, where science is actually a strong link problem, not a weak link problem. So who cares about all the bad stuff that's going on? Don't get fixated on it. Focus on what's good. Look into the presentation of one of these heretics and be like, there's one little piece here that's kind of interesting. Don't get hung up and don't turn away from something just because something's broken about it, right? The bad science isn't the interesting part. The good science is what's actually progressive. That's what actually moves us forward.
So to wrap that, basically, Paul Feyerabend, philosopher of science, I think loosely you could call him, writes this book called Against Method. And in Against Method, he advocates for this thing that's called scientific anarchy. And scientific anarchy is that you should be open to ideas from all sides and shouldn't prize ideas just because they're old. An old idea is not necessarily a good idea. And we have a condition right now where that's exactly how we operate. And so what happens is that because people expect the old ideas to be the best ideas, they get into a position where they're reluctant to look at new or contradictory or strange or out there ideas because they figure that the question is fully settled. And your argument is that, look, these people have constructed a really well-reasoned presentation with decent evidence. Even if they're wrong, there's still something interesting in it.
Or there might be. And you should look for it with all of your might.
There's an aspect to this which has to do with, like, how much time people really want to give to this. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, it's definitely, that's what I mean, I didn't mean to be so glib when I said people just want to go back to sleep, but in some sense, all we have is our attention in this universe.
Yeah.
And if your attention is split amongst all these variables when you're trying to make a decision, it's impossible to arrive at a decision. And so being able to trust institutional knowledge allows you to jump to the decision-making process a lot faster. I mean,
yeah. And to offload it cognitively. Like, we've spent a lot of time talking about how attention is all that you have. And you need to be careful about where you place it, because if you place it in the wrong place, then you'll squander this thing that you have a very limited amount of. And for some people, going and studying the foundations is where they want to put their attention. And for other people, they just want to be able to get a solid, reliable flow of information about the foundations so that they can put their attention somewhere else. And I don't think that it's possible to enter into a world where you force everybody to put their attention on the foundations, because that's just not in people's natures sometimes.
No, but we shouldn't preclude it from participating. And can I read a quote from this? This is from the introduction. He says, "It is thus possible to create a tradition that is held together by strict rules, and that is also successful to some extent. But is it desirable to support such a tradition to the exclusion of everything else? Should we transfer it to the sole rights for dealing in knowledge, so that any result that has been obtained by other methods is at once ruled out of court?"
And obviously, that's would be a bad approach to trying to figure out the world, right? If you basically say that this collection of stuff that we've placed our faith in is what we are forever bound to have faith in, and so we cannot look at things that are contradictory, even if just to learn how an idea is assembled. How do you go about putting an idea together that is robust and interesting and complete and mechanistic, right?
It has to be ever evolving. It's almost the biological definition of aging from a neurobiological standpoint anyways, is that you lose plasticity as you age. It's like these institutional knowledge bases lose plasticity and they get fragile.
God, that's so interesting. And okay, so he has this thing in here about the way that these systems close in on themselves. It was it's a quote actually from John Stuart Mill, and he's talking about, Kuhn, and he's pointing to these stories about the structure of scientific revolutions. And so he's like, Kuhn does this thing where he distinguishes between science and pre-science, and then between revolutions and normal science. So pre-science is, according to him, this place of pluralistic thought, which is eternally in danger of concentrating on opinions rather than things. Right? People are not yet at the stage of science where they're super empirical and they know exactly what they're measuring. It's kind of the stage of philosophizing. It's very theoretical. Everybody's proposing what could be the case, but they don't have any data or empiricism to settle on. And then he's like, let's see, mature science agrees with the two stages mentioned above. And so he's like, in order to produce any kind of factual knowledge, you have to have a component of normal science, which is this obsession with things, where you get to the point where you've produced a theory that holds together. In order to do that, you have to have some component of empiricism, because otherwise you're still just talking about theories, and you haven't looked at the world at all to see if your theories line up with reality.
Yeah, and shouldn't theories arise from looking at reality in the first place?
Yeah, but there's a point where the way that you can see reality is more zoomed out than it will be in the future. Your technology gets better, and so you get to look at things more closely. And as you can look at things more closely, your theories...
You have new data points to fit.
You're like, there's canals on Mars. Maybe. And then there's seasons on Mars. Maybe. And then you get close enough to actually see it, and you're like, oh shit, there aren't. Whoops. But before that point, it was totally viable. There could have been. Who says no?
Right.
And so he says that then there's a transition between novelty and orthodoxy. And John Stuart Mill describes what that looks like. Debates and reasoning are features belonging to periods of transition, when old notions and feelings have been unsettled and no new doctrines have yet succeeded to their ascendancy. At such times, people of any mental activity, having given up their old beliefs and not feeling quite sure that those they still retain can stand unmodified, listen eagerly to new opinions. But this state of things is necessarily transitory. Some particular body of doctrine, in time, rallies the majority around it, organizes social institutions and modes of action conformably to itself. Education impresses this new creed upon the new generations without the mental processes that have led to it, and by degrees it acquires the very same power of compression, so long exercised by the creeds of which it had taken the place. where it's like you just eventually have to go through these cycles of novelty and compression to something old, and then something new blooms. And what's cool is that I think that we are at a place where something new is blooming.
It's interesting how he puts it in terms of opinions. You know,
It's just your opinion, man.
Yeah, but it's funny because I think in science, ultimately, what you see is opinions. You could say interpretations of the data, but what does someone mean by an opinion except for someone's interpretation of the data? And it's funny because, like we're talking to my dad on the phone last night, and he's freaking out because he's like, the news isn't news anymore. It's just a bunch of opinions. And science is interesting because you have the data, which is the news, but what you hear about is the opinions, which is what the data means. And we call that theory. And some people only do opinions, like they build theories upon theories upon theories. And so you just have this lattice of opinions at the end of the day. And then, of course, like ideally, as we're taught in school, you test those opinions against new data and you hopefully refine it and you can actually have a better opinion.
Well, so there's a calcification of opinion into fact at some point, the compression of opinion into fact, and that's what he's saying. So education impresses this new creed, which is this opinion that's slowly starting to coalesce into fact, upon the new generation of students without the mental processes that have led to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because Feyerabend talks a lot about this idea that history of ideas is as important as the ideas themselves. So if you're not learning about the history of quantum mechanics and the people who were there who were proposing different opinions and different perspectives and representing it as this pluralistic sea from which one idea is currently ascendant. And
by the way, some of
eventually,
those opinions are uncertainties and doubts. They're hard.
Yeah.
They're just like, I don't know what that means, but that doesn't make sense to me. Your opinion doesn't make sense to me. I still don't know what it is. That's what we see a lot, I think, in fundamental physics and relativism and so forth.
Yeah. And so if you teach this new set of calcified ideas to another generation of students, and you don't also teach them that, like, hey, this is the way that we arrived at this idea, and perhaps that will periodically need to be relitigated as we know more.
Particularly in light of the uncertainties that were raised at the time.
Exactly.
And never resolved.
And he's like, by not teaching them about that, you ensure the conditions of the future where this new generation will perpetuate the calcification because they have no idea that this was an opinion at some point. They just receive it as fact. And then they're like, well, this is just fact. That's it. And it's not like science is so old that we've been through these cycles a lot. Yeah, like Feyerabend's whole point is he's like, science is a historical process. And if you're not teaching people how to think about science in a historical sense of a plurality of ideas that coalesces briefly and then shatters again, then you're not doing anybody any favors. And I added that, we've never really done this before.
That's right.
Like, this is our first rodeo.
And there's a technological rodeo going on at the same time, outside of purely understanding how nature does its magic.
I think that rodeo's always been going. Science came out of modernity.
I guess what I'm saying is the reason that most people assume we've inherited the abstract layers of opinion that turn into facts is because a lot of those theories are technologically useful, right? The argument being, hey, the theory of the germ theory, for instance, is useful because we've designed medicine that has saved millions and millions of people's lives. So that theory, that opinion, becomes part and parcel with practicality.
And I'm trying to say that I think that science in modern times has always been kind of associated with the Industrial Revolution. And I know that the Industrial Revolution is supposed to have started in like the late 1700s, but arguments can be made that it started in the 1600s, and so in England at least. And so was there a time where science wasn't evolving as part and parcel of what it could do technologically?
No, probably not.
Right?
but I think they are, in some sense, projects that are at odds fundamentally as well.
Interesting. Why is that?
Well, because enter the modern social media landscape or the modern funding landscape, the modern governmental landscape where you have corporations deeply entwined with policymakers, and you stop losing the ability to study things that are outside those structures' interests.
You can still study them. You just have to be poor and not
So
be
you don't.
trying to get
You're
nature
right. You're right.
papers.
I'm being too extreme. It's not that you can't study them. It's that they're not being supported.
And I'm like, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's
Maybe it
not
is
the
okay.
job of maybe it's good that the federal government spends money mostly on things that are geared towards increasing lifespan, increasing the ability to communicate, building infrastructure, making sure that, if something bad happens, we have the technology that'll let us get through whatever happens. Like,
Right,
that's kind
until
of the point.
lifespan starts going down or something, right? It's good until it's not. And the question then becomes, how does that happen? And it's like, well, there's obvious ramifications for tying people's well-being to a for-profit structure.
I think that there's a really and this is kind of totally tangentially related to this. Because if we continue down this path, we end up in a conversation about the drawbacks of living inside of the structure and like where the fall of lifespan comes from. That's like immediately where
Well,
I
we
wanna
said at
take
the
it.
end, like we said earlier, I did, that we should think about what's good and what's bad here. I mean, there's a Chesterton's fence situation as well with all of these things. But there's a lot to explore in between where we're at and whether it's useful or not.
Well, whether what's useful or not.
Whether being subservient to technological progress is useful to science or not in this case.
But I don't think that it is. I think that really well-funded science is subservient to what do you mean subservient? Let's start there.
I mean, if you want to get a grant to do a research project, you have to say how it's going to save the world, which is a technological question.
Okay, but that seems like a reasonable bar for the government funding your research.
So, what about questions of understanding that don't have immediate application?
Do you really need a lot of money for that?
I don't know. You tell me, you worked in a lab like this, right?
I mean, you can get a lot done. There's tons of basic research labs that have shoestring budgets and they do things old school, and like a lot of the cost of science is single-use stuff. You use, 96 well plates, 6 well plates, pipettes, test tubes, all these things that are just constantly getting churned through. And let's say you're at an institution where you don't have a good core facility, right? Because core facilities are infrastructure at the university where the lab that makes $1 million in grants a year buys an expensive piece of equipment, and instead of keeping it in their lab space, it goes into this core space. And so it's everybody's
Yeah,
equipment.
UCSF was great about that.
Right. Columbia, not at all.
Not very good about
It's
it.
weird.
CUNY up north,
Public university.
man, they had a sick core.
But that's an ethics thing. The public universities have good cores. The private universities, everybody's out for their own. But anyways, if you are running a basic research lab in an institution that has a good core facility, you can run your lab on a shoestring budget. Like, you can use old school technology, reusable
We meet
everything.
people who do, but they're always complaining about how much it sucks. I actually think the biggest cost is labor, right? Being able to hire people to work on your project.
Grad students, yeah, and then like you can only hire grad students, they can get an NSF grant, and so like then you kind of like get back into this position of problems, but NSF is also saying like we should fund some fraction of basic research, and so it's like there's things that are in place that make it possible. It's never going to be as lucrative as industry because profit is baked into that. It makes sense that you would put a lot of money into something that has at least the potential of return.
I mean, don't you think in some sense, in so much as we believe in the idea of a democratic republic, that our job is to make sure that profit doesn't decrease the quality of our lives and of the work that we're doing as a civilization?
This is how we come back to the idea of government as being a necessary evil, because the government is the only one that can see these games playing out and step in and say, I have changed the rules of the game in order to prevent this from happening. Because the corporations aren't going to do it themselves. The people, I think that people rationally and logically have a feeling that if it's for sale, then it can't be that bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to come at it from the top down and say, no, like, this is actually bad. You can't sell that. Because if the government's not willing to do that, the corporation will always sell the thing, will always try to seek to maximize profits. And then you end up people on the bottom looking out and being like, well, they wouldn't sell it if it wasn't okay.
So by that line of reasoning, the most dangerous thing to having a functional government is having one that's being pulled, its levers are being pulled on by the corporations, because then they're no longer able to do their job of protecting the people against the corporation's paperclip maximizer.
Are you trying to get some of that AI money? Let me see if I follow that. We're basically, if you're going to have a free government, you need to make sure that all of its levers are not held by corporations.
Same with the free science, let's say. Any free institution.
I think that that's a decent definition. Any free institution cannot have all of its levers controlled by a single entity whose main motive is profit or whatever. You fill in the blank. It doesn't have to be profit. An entity that has a single aim and controls all the levers of power that allows it to achieve that aim can probably be said to be bad.
It doesn't have to be a single entity. There's lots of different pharmaceutical companies with their fingers mucking around in medical research. There's all sorts of, it can be happening all over the place. But yeah, once you start getting entities that are not non-human entities that are exercising their intentions upon an institution, you're in bad shape.
I would agree with that.
The ultimate end of that, well, not on the corporate sense, but it's played out in other landscapes with various totalitarian and authoritarian regimes. You could have a single entity as a person in the case of an authoritarian dictatorship, or you could have a bureaucracy in the case of some of the nastier communist experiments. And it can happen in science too. And that's sort of where we're at here.
So the argument is that it has happened in science across the board at all levels. Or is the argument smaller than that?
Well, the argument is that it's crept into everyone's hearts even, who is interested in science. People who show up to a presentation like Simon Shack and lose their mind and say, I can't stand this, or people who stand up and say, this is flat earth theory, or people who, there's a baby with the bathwater practice that is knee-jerk for a lot of people who have minimal interest in career science.
So I will say this. I think that a scientific presentation requires a certain degree of panache.
Any presentation does. I mean, giving a speech, whatever.
Right? The person who's sweating profusely and stuttering their way through the same exact speech will be perceived less well than somebody who's charismatic, confident, and is able to walk you through the speech by holding your hand and taking you on a journey, right? And I think that a lot of the reasons that people are having a negative reaction to Simon is that it wasn't as cohesively wrought of a presentation as it could have been. Like, even the comment that he left was even kind of an apology. It was like, I had friends over, it was Saturday night, it was late, I probably could have done this better. And I'm like, I think you could have, and I think that if you had done it better, and it was more linear and really intentional, I think that idea would be easier to swallow because his presentation would be so good that you wouldn't have to go through the process of being like,
I think that even somebody who sat through a really good presentation of the idea that the sun isn't at the center of the solar system, you're going to have some percentage of people that are just like, this is flat Earth theory. I'm not even going to think about what you're saying.
but you'd have more of those people.
Maybe a better example is Neil deGrasse Tyson's reaction to Terrence Howard, where he's like,
Actually,
1 + 1 or 1 × 1 does not equal 2. Therefore, everything downstream that you're saying to me is garbage and you need to go back to school.
But I don't think that Simon says, because the thing is that the more that I've been thinking about the Tychosium, I'm like, I actually think that if you took the mechanics of the solar system and you, the Copernican heliocentric solar system, and then you just mapped them onto the Earth's frame of reference, I think that you would get the Tychosium. I think the Tychosium...
With that 1 mile an hour orbit, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but it's like, we're talking about like, if you set Earth at, or like, because we know that the Earth has like a little bit of an orbit, like the solar system has its own like helical trajectory through space. So we know that Earth has a spiraling orbit. And so if you set that spiraling orbit to be your 0 point, and then you looked at the dynamics of the solar system around you, I think the Tychosium would naturally fall out. It's just a question of frame of reference. And so I don't think that it's the same thing as saying 1 × 1 is 2, because that's not a question of frame of reference. There's no frame of reference in which that geometrically or algebraically will make sense.
I mean, he makes a sort of metaphoric analogy for it. And
but it's not, this is like the thing, right? It's not a metaphor. 1 × 1 is 2 is not a metaphor. It's a mathematical operation that has rules and axioms. And so when you're like, I will disregard...
And he's trying to take a shot at the axioms.
Yeah, but I'm like, the axiom of motion can be viewed as relative. And if you transfer the center of your frame of reference to the Earth rather than to the sun, then all of a sudden you get the Tychos model. Like, that's not challenging any axiom. That's just saying, shift the frame of reference and you get a new model. And so anybody
I don't think it's as simple as that.
I actually think it is.
I don't think so.
That's why these planets have these apparent paths from the skies. That's why they came up with this model in the first place. It's because it's what it looks like from our point
I understand that. I understand that. But he's saying that it's because of these actual circular orbit patterns.
But what I'm trying to say is that depending on where you put your frame of reference, you either get a circular orbit or you get the Tychosium orbits. If you place your frame of reference at the sun, you get circular orbits. If you place your frame of reference on Earth, you get the Tychosium.
Elliptical orbits.
That's like, sure, but like...
It's not nothing. It's a real difference. It's a real difference.
No, because the point that I'm trying to make is that if you... I feel like I'm just saying the same thing over and over again. I need to say it differently. Like, if you stand on the sun, you can build a picture of the solar system that has elliptical orbits, and everything is going around the sun.
Simon would say if you stood on the sun, you would see circular orbits of Venus and Mercury.
But you would also see other stuff too. Like, all the other stuff would also be like from
you'd
your
see the
frame
trochodal patterns of the other things.
You wouldn't. You'd see a totally different set of patterns. Because the frame of reference is what allows you to construct the pattern. You can't, right? The trochoidal pattern...
There'd be different trochoidal patterns, I understand.
Yeah.
But they would be circular orbits, not elliptical, according to Simon.
I would be really curious to see if in the Tychosium you can change the barycenter to the sun. Because right now you can only do like Earth or the barycenter. But if you could change it to the sun, I think you might recover elliptical orbits.
I don't think so.
I don't know. That's my instinct.
I mean, yeah. Anyways, there's people who show up to that and they're like, this is flat Earth theory and I can't take it. And that seems to be the more common way that people approach scientific presentations, both in the audience who are non-scientific but scientifically curious, and expert credentialed people in their ivory towers. This seems to be the scientific approach for criticism, And I think that Feyerabend is arguing for something which I think we should give a name to, which is more like, where's the baby in this bathwater? I would love to coin a phrase for this alternative approach.
Doesn't he have a phrase?
Probably.
I think he has a phrase. Hold on 1 second. I think that he calls it basically like counter rule science.
I don't like it.
Let's see.
I mean, he's really interested in rules because the laws constrained the way people thought at some point in time, and they still constrain the way we think at this point in time.
Right.
He makes this, there's an interesting quote. The gradual emergence of the wave theory of light occurred only because some thinkers decided not to be bound by certain obvious methodological rules. Or because they unwillingly broke them.
Yeah. You have to break rules in order to be able to come up with something new.
And so there's that, but there's also this idea that there might be really interesting things happening even when things are broken about a theory. This maybe goes beyond Feyerabend, because this is something I'm noticing more and more. Like doing this project, how many presentations do we sit through that we're 100% on board with? Including podcasts that don't get published.
I can't think I have any.
Right. So
most of them I'm like, I can see what you're saying.
Okay, so things are intelligible and understandable often. Yeah, we that's our bare minimum for even having someone on the show. But that you look at it and all of it is rock solid and you're completely compelled that they have the answer to this problem. Almost never, right?
Maybe like Marvin Herndon, Don Petit, like some of the goats.
I guess so, but doesn't Marvin, I could be wrong, no, Marvin had a good mechanism. I don't know, Marvin has stuff that I don't, like, I've never gone deep into his nucleosynthesis theory.
No, but I'm like, this is fine, this is,
right, it's on a spectrum.
Might even be likely.
It's on a spectrum. I mean? Yeah. It's on a spectrum. You're more swayed by things than others.
Yeah, like those are the closest presentations that I can think of off the top of my head where I'm like, most of this seems to hang together pretty well.
But like, I guarantee you if I go right now to Reddit and I'm like, what's a problem with Marvin Herndon's theory? Someone's going to point out some nitty gritty thing and they're going to be like, this guy is a flat earther basically because of it. Like we can disregard every thought he's ever had because he made an arithmetic mistake on page 45 of this article that he wrote.
But that's like the Redditification
that's how people think in general.
That's how Redditors think. Like that's the Platonic archetype of Redditor.
Dude,
I think that's a type of person. Hold on. I think that not every single person who is a Redditor has a Reddit account and actually uses Reddit. Like I think that there's a Redditor mindset, and I say this kind of tongue in cheek, but it's like the Platonic form of this kind of engagement with ideas is the Redditor.
It's also the institutionalist. It's also the Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's the Don Lemon. It's like all of these people that are the mouthpieces for these giant institutions. They have the same immune response to things. If there's one little number that's out of place, like you forgot to carry the one time ever, and your narrative goes against the mountain that they're sitting on, they'll just knock it down.
Yeah, so that's all of the Neil deGrasse Tysons, the Don Lemons, the whatevers. Those are all they occupy the Redditor archetype.
Right.
That's
and there's a person on the street who has no interest in anything except for their own sanity, i.e., their attention space being simplified. That they are also reacting in the same way.
I actually think that those people probably just ignore it. I think, right, because there's like a collection of people who react to it negatively where like that person's an idiot, that person's flat earth. Then there's a collection of people who are just like, I'm not interested in this stuff. I don't really care.
A huge portion, for sure.
Right? And those people are a different type of archetype where they're, I don't know, in the internet analogy, they're probably like the TikTokers. TikTok is not the place for in-depth engagement with ideas. It's for dancing and funny videos. And so, okay, that's there. And then, in my mind, there's certain pockets of text-based social networks, like Facebook groups, like the Demystify Sci group. You've been maintaining this thing for what, like 5-6 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like you have a good community of people and they comment on the articles and there's discussion and there's an ethos of inquiry.
An ethos of inquiry coupled to an anarchism level tolerance.
Yeah, so this is the society of high decouplers. I've talked about this before, where there are people that are curious, there are people that don't have any super, super strongly held beliefs about how the universe should work. And
Sometimes they do.
Well, then they're not anarchists.
Well, they're anarchists in that they don't enter into a post, an OP, and refute it. They might enter it with, hey, I have a better idea of how this could work. So they do believe, in some sense, there's people who believe they know how things work. But I'd say you're right. I mean, just to roll with it, generally speaking, people are tolerant, they're interested, they're curious. But they're usually like, oh, this goes with something else I was thinking. We encounter this all the time.
Yeah.
So you tell somebody a new idea, oh, this reminds me of this other thing I heard of. Or I've been thinking about this cosmological model or whatever.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like that's kind of how the patron chats work too, where there's like a question or some piece of evidence or some piece of media, and it's not like there's one way of interpreting it. Everybody kind of comes at it from different directions and is like, well, I think that this is what this means, and I think that this is what this means. And so it's this process of together trying to see if we can come up with something that makes more sense than where we were an hour before we started. And that I think is being able to decouple anarchy and being able to decouple your emotions from your beliefs are kind of similar things, because you don't identify with your specific belief. You identify more with being a person who takes the time to arrive at a belief for a reason. And that reason is not final. Like, you'll switch if necessary. But I do think that you have to maintain some like basic ethics.
Right. That's where things get interesting. And I haven't finished this Feyerabend book. Does he get into the ethics of this?
I mean...
Because, like, I might as well just sum up what we've been talking about at the
Sure.
end of... I think this is at the end of chapter 1. He says, my thesis is that anarchism helps to achieve progress in any one of the senses one cares to choose. Even a law and order science will succeed only if anarchistic moves are occasionally allowed to take place. It is clear, then, that the idea of a fixed method or a fixed theory rests on too naive a view of man and his social surroundings. To those who look at the rich material provided by history and who are not intent on improving it in order to please their lower instincts, their craving for intellectual security in the form of clarity, precision, quote, objectivity, quote, truth, it will become clear that there is only one principle that can be defended under all circumstances and in all stages of human development. It is the principle, anything goes. This abstract principle must now be examined and explained in concrete detail, chapter 2.
So it's like, anything goes. And I think that what has to be appended to that is and it'll be better for you if it's useful. Because anything does go, right? If you can put together a theory that is holding together on some set of ideas and axioms and logical, if A, then B, then C, then okay, go for it. But if it leads you completely astray in the wrong direction and you get no further clarity on nature, then, I mean, you're...
And I think his argument, what he's digging around at, is that the dialectic is the best way to understand the truth.
Which is?
Having counterfactual positions. So having a proliferation of ideas, by going down that rabbit hole and discovering, maybe you find something wrong with Simon's model and you discover it. Now you've learned something about the solar system that you never knew before, and you can apply it to your future development of theories about the solar system.
I mean, you can make the argument that it's possible that you go down the rabbit hole of Simon's theory and you just discover that there's a bad assumption. And so the entire thing is built on error and there's nothing to learn except for, don't make stupid mistakes. And you've wasted all of this time and you knew already all along that the original model was correct. And here you are with nothing to show for all of this time that you've spent except for some arbitrary debunking, which sucks because you've wasted all that time on what?
I just don't know that that's ever happened to me in the course of anything that I've ever examined. I don't know that anyone's presented a theory to me that I haven't ended up learning something about, because it forced me to reconsider certain pieces of the premise that I'd built my worldview on in the first place.
That's assuming that there aren't deep, fatal flaws in the theories that you're examining, which might be...
I'm talking about rational theories, by the way. I'm just assuming it's a rational theory, i.e. it's based on some axioms that are set up front, some logical deduction, and some initial piece of evidence and assumptions that I can look at least. It's got to hang together as a story. That's all I mean.
I mean, you're you're probably one of the best people that I've met at doing this, where you can look at a presentation and it can just be mostly garbage, and you can be like, all of this stuff
This used to piss you off so much. You've kind of come around to it, though.
I have. Well, I don't have the ability to encounter something so quickly. And so I think that you're super good at pattern matching this way, where you're able to look at a big body of work and identify the key pieces of it, and then be like, these key pieces don't make sense, but this key piece is actually really interesting, and it actually ties into like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then you just kind of like really quickly are able to slot it in this model, and everybody kind of like moves around a little bit, and now you have this new worldview.
Well, I think it just starts from unburdening yourself from the need for this theory to either be wholly true or wholly false. I would kind of start with the assumption that this theory is probably partially right and partially wrong. Most likely. And that partial could be on the whole scale of 100% to 0%, but the boundaries are almost never touched. Those are the limits on the veracity of what's here.
Which is really interesting because I don't... Okay, so I was racking my brain. I was like, have we encountered theories that we've learned nothing from? And I'm like, maybe flat Earth?
But have we really encountered flat Earth?
We spent a lot of time with that friend of ours who was really into it. And I mean, it's not like I spent months of my life or years of my life on it, but it was a theory that I spent time with that I feel like I did not gain anything from encountering. It doesn't have the same flavor as even the electric universe, which I think has valuable points that ought to not be left on the table.
I mean, I think that the flat Earth, we didn't spend a lot of time on it, but that's because I think that its fundamental assumptions can be taken apart very quickly by calling people on the other side of the world that you're friends with and asking them what time of day it is.
Well, they have a mechanism for dealing with that.
The rays, the angle of the rays and stuff, that was kind of what killed it for me, right? And you just ask them like, hey, what time is it? Where are the rays? What's the angle of the rays? Like, you can solve this problem very quickly. And you find out that it's solid data that you can rely upon because you know people on the other side of the world that you can talk to. So, look, a theory that you can immediately undermine the assumptions of, that are the pillar assumptions of the theory, it's like, okay, well then there's not much going on here. That what am I to do with it if the assumptions themselves are completely brittle? So yeah, you probably devote your attention to something that has more assumptions which can hold up. At least not obvious fractures.
And yet flat Earth is popular.
It's popular in a troll wars kind of way.
I think it's more like a Rajneeshi type of way.
Like culty?
Yeah, like I think that it's the same impulse that drives people to cults also drives people to obviously insufficient scientific theories.
I don't know if it's a scientific theory if it doesn't start with assumptions that are empirically robust.
Feyerabend would say that that's not the case. Like his argument is that at some point you will start with assumptions that have perhaps not yet been...
Can they be lies though? Because a flat Earth assumption would be there's just a lie there. They're just like, hey, look, it's not the same time of day at different parts of the as it should be, and you're like, but that's just not true.
I mean, Feyerabend has an argument. I think that what he would respond with to that is to say that there's some fraction of inquiry that we do that is polluted by the equipment that we use to do the inquiry. And so if there is a measurement issue, then something that has been measured can be accused of being wrong because the measurement system sucks. And so
That's what Simon Shack does, right? He's like, we've never been to space, so all those measurements are garbage. I don't have to pay attention to them.
And Feyerabend would say fair game, right? Because you don't, I mean, obviously this is a very conspiratorial version of it, but I think that the Feyerabend version would be like, well, maybe we have some assumption in the way that we've built those machines that produces this apparent mass. But in reality, that's not the actual mass. That's just a mistake that we've made because we've designed the machines based on our very limited understanding. And so it can only give us one answer. But the truth is something that is far more difficult to grasp. Where I'm like, that's wholly possible. But it also creates a situation where how do you build anything? Like how do you move on from a question? How do you ever move on
Well, you
from a
have
question?
an ecosystem of theories, is what it comes down to, right?
Yeah, but the next generation has to build on those theories because once you have the ecosystem of theories, then science is a progressive discipline by its very nature. The next generation cannot simply continue rehashing the same ecosystem of theories or just adding more theories to that ecosystem. You'll never get anywhere.
Sometimes it does build upon old ideas, and sometimes it doesn't.
And so the challenge with scientific anarchy or any kind of methodological anarchy is knowing which of those ideas that have been built on are robust and which ones are not. Because some of them must be robust. Or do we assume like a perfectly flat field of probability for all versions of nature being equally possible? That seems unlikely.
Yeah, generally somebody has more assumptions that are really taxing to the imagination than somebody else. I mean, look, if Simon's assumption set comes down to the fact that there's a massive conspiracy where every space project and all of the hundreds of thousands of people that ever worked on them were all lying, and somebody else has a model of the solar system that doesn't require this massive elaborate conspiracy, then I think people would probably lean on the one that it seems more reliable because it doesn't have these baseless accusations in it.
But what I'm saying is that you can still tweak that a tiny bit, and you can say that the reason that he can get rid of the measurements for gravity is because the machines that measure gravity are built up with a fatal assumption inside of them that prevents us from ever being able to see anything other than what we expect to see. And that's an argument that would have to be like fleshed out further in order to demonstrate that that is the case, right? Because you can accuse the machine of being wrong.
You need to say how it's broken.
You need to say how it's broken.
Yeah, because in this case, it's orbiters and spacecraft. Their trajectories are getting twisted by gravitation, and they use this prolifically to do all sorts of gravity assist maneuvers and be captured into the orbit for their studies of Jupiter and Venus and so forth. So you need to tell me how those things are working without gravity.
Or how they're measuring things incorrectly and still coming
achieving
to the same conclusion, right? It starts to become like too many things built upon each other. And
by the way, this, like, what's so tantalizing about Simon's situation is, if true, it's big. Like, if there are two different ways to model the solar system that are equivalently valid in terms of the actual experimental data, that would be huge. But there aren't, right? Because Simon's throwing out more than half the data, which is all the gravitational data. He's like, that's not part of his model. So you have two theories, one which has a bigger domain of data that fits it than the other one. And so generally speaking, I think most technologically minded people are going to choose the theory that's substantiated by the most amount of data, Now, if it turns out that half that data is a lie, well, then of course those people are going to be duped. But deception's a very difficult thing to factor into any of this Feyerabend stuff. Except Feyerabend would still probably argue that, hey, it's better that we entertain these ideas because it'll force us to rethink our own conclusions, and that will be productive.
There just seems to be a certain amount of trust that you can do away with if you're willing to consider lots of different options. I think that that's kind of what he's trying to get at. He's like, normally you would need this to be a really, really high trust situation, because you have to believe that the data that has been collected to serve as the foundation for some theory is so good that it can never be questioned. It's the ultimate truth.
And ultimates are the opposite of what Feyerabend is advocating.
Yeah, he's basically like, look, you'll never get to the point of an ultimate truth. This is absurd. You have the only truth that you can really get at philosophically is the things that you experience with your own body and your own senses, and even those lie to you. And so there's this thing of, can you actually get to some ground truth?
He puts it this way, just to summarize it. My intention is not to replace one set of general rules by another such set. My intention is rather to convince the reader that all methodologies, even the most obvious ones, have their limits. Right? This is like, if you ever spend any time hanging out with anarchists in general, this is kind of what their project is all about. It's not that anarchy is to be lived by as a set of rules. It's not supposed to be a system to replace another system. It's literally an attitude towards approaching a system. That's all.
And I think
it's not meant to be an absolutist approach, though. It's just a piece of yourself which you should maintain.
So that makes a situation where you can have no unshakable pillars of the world, because so the end result of a world that is governed by the ethics of anarchy will look very, very different than the end result of a world that's governed by this sort of pyramid foundation and progressive narrowing of the domain of possibilities, right? You have this sea of theories and competing ideas and little clusters. This is like team consciousness.
This is the dream of the Democratic Republic.
Right?
Everyone's so well informed that they all just smoothed out make the best decisions, and everybody's building the best possible humane future.
Yes. And
it's a beautiful dream. We learn it in first grade, right?
Do you?
Yeah, they're like the United States of America, blah, 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 right? I mean, I grew up here anyways. Like, that's the dream. It sounds so good on paper. It's just like, holy shit, yeah, you guys have absolutely cracked the code. All those like medieval idiots for the last several thousand years with their, dictators and oligarchs and everything, those kings, my God, how barbarian were they? And then, you slowly start to wake up to the reality that it's not that easy to pull that off in practice, despite all the fanfare and despite all of the incredible foundational text that accompanies it, and the promise and the dream that's possible. Because it's a beautiful dream. It's a beautiful dream. And you're kind of saying the same thing plays out in science. It's like Feyerabend's, it's a cool idea, Feyerabend, but does that really work out? Especially when you start getting these perverse incentive structures proliferating and capturing different arms of that institution. And is that inherent in any long-term institution, that it gets perverted and corrupted by perverse incentive structures? It kind of seems like it.
Keller would say yes. I'm inclined to agree that unless something has an expiration date, where it just gets to a place and it's like, goal achieved, goodbye, then you're going to run into these things, right? But it's like, I don't want to believe that it's impossible. Right? This is kind of this is where we started the conversation, where I was like, I don't want to believe that it is impossible for somebody who runs a good and interesting podcast to rise to the top by virtue of the fact that they're producing the best quality thing. I want to believe that that's possible.
It can be true too.
But I think that not in a world that has so many incentives and so many fingers in the pot trying to get it to look a certain way. And that's the freaky
It
thing.
reaches a threshold breaking point, right? Like the United States could be the best country in the world by virtue of its ideals until it's not, until it becomes captured and broken by the same forces that break all institutions. And then all of a sudden, it's just a shell of its old dream.
What's really interesting is that from that conversation about, the arc of institutions, there's the idea that there's a couple of institutions that have managed to revive themselves, which is Apple and Microsoft. Apple died a sad death in the late 90s of just being way behind the curve, not really doing anything interesting. And Steve Jobs, who was there in the first place, came back and was able to push it to great heights. Satya Nadella, who's at Microsoft, I don't know the Microsoft story as well, but I do know that they got slammed with a bunch of antitrust lawsuits. Then Bill Gates left, and so the company's basically, it just was reviled. I've been waiting for that to happen for days. And he's come back in and he's like started all these partnerships and like revived the company. So it's possible. And I don't think that the dream of America is dead. It would be too depressing to believe in that.
No, that dream can never die. It's too old of a dream. It goes all the way back to the Greeks. It probably goes way before then. This idea that you can have a people ruled by themselves is not particularly novel.
And so ultimately, I think that's the goal of this project for me, is to be able to encounter weird and difficult ideas and give them space and see how they all play together and try to create an ecosystem of thought as opposed to there being a single party line. And I think that makes it difficult for people to put a handle on it. Because there isn't a central narrative.
The central narrative is needle in the hay. It's like there's something there. What is it? Where is it? I mean, people have to ultimately trust that we're not going to bring people on the show with no needle in the hay, right? And I don't think people realize this, but we leave a lot of stuff behind. We have a lot of meetings with people where we don't see the needle in the hay, and we don't bring it to the audience.
Yeah.
But I think that training ourselves to look for the needle in the hay in all of our interactions at every level beyond science, just in terms of meeting people, encountering things that you're not familiar with in the universe. I mean, I try to do it with music all the time too, right? Like, I like to believe that if I'm in the right state of mind, that I can look at any piece of music and be like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Here, this one little thing is, I really like that kick drum. I really like how they made use of this negative space here, or whatever it is. I don't know. I really like, how much that rapper sounds like he means what he's saying.
I can totally see the podcast being renamed Needle in the Hay. I really like that. Needle in the Hay. And I can see even the art for it, which would be like a haystack with like a needle sticking out of it, like Arthur's sword.
It's pretty good. We'd have to thank Elliott Smith for that one.
I know. But I think that it far predates.
I know, but I can't say that phrase without thinking of that song.
I know. But it's like playing in my head right now. I think you're right. I think that that's the arc of it. And our task is really to figure out how to make those presentations interesting, because the hay can be really disorienting and frustrating for people, because what they want is they want the needle. And if there's something that we bring that isn't structured well enough that people can really bear the hay until we get to the needle, it can be really difficult. And I think that
works against it too. Like, if all you do is present the needle, then you're basically mainstream institutional whatever, science, for instance. We're just going to present needles. We're going to teach you all the needles, and that's all you need to know.
And that's what he's saying,
but I'm
right?
Like, in order to learn how to think, in order to actually make a progressive science in the future, in order for our children to continue the progressive project of understanding the universe better and better, they got to learn how to take the needle out of the hay. And you'll never learn that if you just get a string of needles.
That's exactly what he says. So An account of the alternatives replaced, of the process of replacement of the arguments used in its course, of the strength of the old views and the weaknesses of the new. Not a systematic account is necessary, but a historical account of each state of knowledge, which can alleviate the drawbacks and increase the rationalities of one's theoretical commitments. That's exactly what he's saying. He's basically saying, you have to know how to look for the needle, because if you're just presented with needle after needle, you never learn what the process is of searching for it. And the process of searching is what makes science or anything else functional. It's being able to look through it and sift and know how to go about it in order to find the pearl of wisdom.
And it's not easy, right? That's not something that you're born knowing how to do. This is why, I've talked about this before, this is why the Greeks were so insistent on dialogues being the primary transmission method of ideas. Because you have to learn how to think. And the only way you do that is by encountering conflicting information and sussing it out, by testing it, like testing the assumptions against your knowledge base. Making sure you can see the axiomatic transformations, the logical steps from one idea to the next. Wait, I can't see that. Hold on just a second. So it's essential. I think that's the whole point of what we're doing here, is trying to strengthen that muscle in our own brains, first and foremost, and second of all, hopefully share that opportunity with other people who are listening.
And that's a big reason of why I wish that we could offshore some of this office work, basically. Right? Because ideally, the best way to do that is by being at least somewhat read in the assumptions before you show up. Because it's very, very hard to get somebody to admit their assumptions, because you can ask them all sorts of questions, and if there's a thing that they know that they can't say, and you don't know about that thing, they can just kind of gloss over. Like if we had gone into the Simon Shack discussion, and we hadn't read Tychos before, and we hadn't talked to people about it before, and done all the back-end thought about it, it would have been even more difficult to actually get to this thing of like, okay, so this is the hay, this is what underpins this arrangement of the hay, and so the needle is that there's a gravitational explanation that's still necessary for this, and yet it still works. And so we basically need to find a way to devote more of our time to doing that kind of preliminary search, as opposed to just writing emails, because we're just
So shout out, anybody wants to help us book more of these podcasts and find people with needles in the hay, we would love to give you money.
yeah.
But I think the method that we're developing here, and it'd be cool to get people's feedback, but I think the streamlined process, and of course processes all have their limits, but it's essentially to let people walk you through their theory, so axiomatically leap from evidence point to evidence point, link them together into a narrative that explains something, and then at the end we consider the assumptions that those axioms rest. Like, what's the core axiom here? What are the core assumptions at the bottom before it's transformed? And usually that's where there's a lot of room to grow for almost everybody. You know, even the scientific theories that we work on in our spare time, there's core assumptions that need endless development, right?
The metaphysics of the theory. I think that's the heart, that's the place from which everything else grows. It's like the roots of the theory. And you have to understand the metaphysics of the person who's telling the story, because those metaphysics are what define the rules, which then are used to make the presentation. And so if you can get to somebody's metaphysics and you can really understand that, then you can see if those metaphysics make sense to you, because you'll get a completely different picture depending on what that starting point looks like.
Right, which is why along the way it's very helpful to get to know something about the person that you're talking to, even before you hear their theory. Like, where are you coming from? Like, what's your story? What sort of experiences did you have that even made you think that this needed an explanation? Because most of the things we talk about on the show, there's extant explanations for.
Yeah, like every single thing. I don't think we've ever encountered a topic that doesn't have a mainstream explanation on it.
I mean, I think since you're 10 years old and you start asking grown-ups how things work, there's an explanation for everything. Even if it's warped space-time and God knows what else, it's still treated as an explanation.
Yeah.
You might not like it, but there's explanations for everything. So what made you even, that's a good place to start with people too. So that's kind of the needle in the hay method.
The needle in the hay method. You gonna trademark that? Yeah, I mean, I think we should keep talking about Feyerabend. We can come back to it down the line. I think that this is kind of this is definitely my metaphysics, if there was a text that I could point to. And I don't agree with everything that he says, but I think that it's a really, really, really interesting starting point. He wrote it a long time ago. He wrote it in 1975. And so it's definitely something that warrants updating with everything that we're seeing now.
All right, well, let's pay attention to it. Let's go talk to some more people.
Oh, yeah.
Crazy ideas.
Let's do it.